Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Modern Retail Plus Talks. I'm Gabriella Barco. I'm a reporter here at Modern Retail, and I'm going to be speaking to Chris Vaughn, who's Saucey's co-founder and CEO, on how to manage brand partnerships, especially during this time. Before we get into the chat with Chris, I'm going to be giving you a little bit of a state of the industry of the, obviously Saucey being an alcohol delivery brand platform. I guess brand too. Everyone's a brand. I'm going to be giving you a little bit of background on what's been going on since the pandemic started. I think, obviously we know that apps have existed for a few years now, but like many industries, alcohol was sort of forced to take on e-commerce when a lot of things began to shut down. A lot of these apps were already being used, of course, but with brick and mortar obviously being an option before this, people weren't as, willing to try them out. So the shutdown of dining, travel, live events, which are actually, do account for the majority of what the alcohol industry relies on for revenue, all overnight shut down. And so what happened was at-home drinking, which I'm sure we've all been doing, well, most of us, just basically became the only option, which kind of catapulted this category into action. Liquor stores, even though a lot of them are considered essential, began to limit their hours and encourage a lot of pickup and delivery themselves, some of them through their own apps and others with, the likes of Drizzly, Minibar, and of course, Saucey. And so that also prompted a lot of people who are in quarantine to try out a lot of these services. So adoption began to see a huge turnout. And then, from there, some of the smaller trends that came out of that was the brands, which are, the alcohol brands we all know that are owned by select, conglomerates across the world like Diageo, Bacardi, InBev, began to move their ad dollars, which normally go to things like live events, on premise, quote unquote, things like hospitality, travel, were suddenly shut down. So a lot of them began to move those marketing dollars to these platforms to reach the customers while they're shopping. And then in turn, obviously, platforms did see increased interest from these brands, especially like sponsored content and social, to generate conversion, which unlike, a bar, is actually happening right on the spot with, the checkout carts right there. And then from there, I guess this is where we're going to take it, which is that Chris is going to go over how Saucey and his team were able to generate and execute a lot of those partnerships. And like, I think Chris, is what you said was that this is the biggest transformation the industry's seen since maybe Prohibition. No? Yes?
Yeah, no, it's been, you're having huge shifts in pretty much every aspect of the industry. So it's a fascinating time.
Cool. All right. Well, from here, I'll let you take on and kind of, give us some tips on how you've been getting these brands to advertise and convert on the platform.
Sure. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I'd say quick background on Saucey. We started in early 2014, launched in May of 2014 as a service that fundamentally was delivery of beer, wine, and spirits. Since then, we've added other categories like snacks, mixers, add-ons, let people, get their convenience items. But we had this sort of early hypothesis that you could have basically anything you wanted delivered, but for some reason you couldn't have a bottle of wine show up at your house in 30 minutes in most markets. And so we started diving into the industry and really found, I think, a couple of major trends. One, the category has a lot of restrictions on access to capital. A lot of pension funds, university endowments, which are major LPs, and a lot of venture funds have restrictions against, alcohol, firearms, tobacco, pornography. So it's an industry that has limited access to capital. From a regulatory basis, you're dealing with effectively 50 different countries in the US, right? I mean, every state sort of acts with its own set of rules, making it almost like its own country. So from a regulatory perspective, very difficult to navigate. From access to capital perspective, difficult to navigate. And then the industry itself was just very old, very much sort of unchanged. But what we found is that the majority of purchases in alcohol are consumed the same day that they're purchased. I think over 80% of wine is consumed within hours of being purchased. And so it's arguably one of the higher impulse-driven buying categories out there. And so we found that delivery would be a natural fit for consolidating someone's purchasing behavior, being able to introduce better recommendations and add-ons to their shopping experience. And then I think alcohol off-premise retail is sort of historically not the best part of the industry. On-premise, bars, restaurants, stadiums, hotels do, I think, alcohol experiences very well. Off-premise tends to be a bit of a low point. And so if you're a major brand and you're advertising, or you're Grey Goose and you're saying, drink Grey Goose, you'll have this great life, that translates well into a restaurant setting. In the liquor store, you're just sort of another dusty bottle on the shelf. And so we tried to bridge that gap into saying, how do we act as a service that really carries a brand's message all the way through to the customer in many ways? And so we launched in 2014, are here where we are today. There's been a lot of interesting, twists and turns to that journey. But, today we serve over 40 major markets across the US, close to 1,000 neighborhoods. We're partnered primarily with independent mom and pop liquor stores, though we have worked with a lot of the big box players as well. And then we work with a lot of the biggest brands, not just in the industry, but in the world. And so it's we've had the benefit of using partnerships to not only drive highly experiential moments for our customers, but also unlock growth and provide brands in this industry insights that they haven't historically had. So we can go through and sort of kick off the things that we'll be talking about. But I think it's important to note, when you're starting a company or you're early stage or late stage, there's something that you need to recognize about where are you in your own journey, and what type of partnerships are you going to be able to get access to based on the stage of your company. Once you start getting a little bit of traction, how do you connect with major brands or sort of your dream partnerships? Who is it that you think will really catapult you to the next level? How do you reach out to those companies? How do you structure those partnerships? And then how do you execute on them? I think from there is, how do you then use partnerships to not only drive growth and revenue, but really create some sort of mutually beneficial relationship that can be ongoing. And then we'll touch on a few of sort of the basics of partnerships, how you need to make sure you structure these things so that they're actually successful and not just big distractions in your business. So, thinking about sort of the stage of company that you're at, when you're an early stage company and nobody knows your name and nobody knows your brand, and you have very few customers, obviously you would love to work with a Coca-Cola or with a Lululemon or whoever it may be, whoever you think is going to be a big partner for you. But why would they work with you? Nobody knows you. You have no customers. So thinking about, as an early stage company, I think you have to be very realistic about the restrictions that you have. For us, some of those restrictions were geographical. We were only in parts of Los Angeles. We weren't national. We didn't have this big footprint. So given that we were this very small localized company, how could we do a partnership with a big company? What could we offer that would be different or interesting? I think that was something that we really had to deal with. Next, as you start to get a little bit bigger, people get they get to know your name. They start to figure out, okay, you're a going concern in the community. You obviously, the number of companies that you can partner with starts to broaden pretty dramatically. And then as you start to scale and get bigger and bigger and bigger, thinking about larger scale partnerships that really can drive either your expansion geographically, expansion into new categories, expansion into new audiences. And then beyond that, when you're, I think a well-known entity, how to use partnerships purely to drive large-scale growth. And I think you've seen some companies like DoorDash do this extremely well, with huge broadcast television ads paid for by people like Jack in the Box or paid for by people like Taco Bell, where they've unlocked a new channel for those companies, being delivery. And then because of their national footprint, those brands are willing to put their dollars behind a ton of their growth. So thinking through which stage you're in, really, you have to understand the restrictions, understand why somebody would or would not talk to you, and then figure out what are you going to bring to the table, and then also is this mutually beneficial back to you. You would love to work with Coca-Cola, and maybe you land that deal, but what are you getting out of it in addition to what are you providing? I think for us, a couple of our very first early partnerships, we had the benefit of partnering with both big and small companies. Early on, one of our first sort of activations was with a company called MeUndies, the world's most comfortable underwear. Back then, they were smaller than they are today. Now they're a big company with retail locations and all sorts of things. But we were smaller. We were just getting started. They were a little bit bigger, but we knew that they were a company always looking for creative angles. They did sort of underwear vending machines in different malls around the country. They always did these interesting stunts, and we're fascinated by how they would connect with customers. And we thought that we could be an outlet where we could come together on a partnership and drive a lot of press and attention. And we did. We did an activation together that generated over 75 million press impressions inside of a week for free, because we came up with something really creative together. Another example of early stage that was interesting is, coming back to where the industry is just a pretty legacy category. Anheuser-Busch, AB InBev is a $200 billion market cap company. At the time, they basically had a 0-person digital team. This was 6 years ago. And they had just started this little team in Palo Alto that they called the Beer Garage. And it had 3-4 people there. And they reached out, hearing about us, primarily because of the stuff we did with MeUndies and a couple other activations that we did that made us seem really big or look really big. And they reached out to us and said, hey, we're looking at this category called e-commerce for the first time as a company. Curious, do you have insights as to what type of beer people drink per, geography or per market, or how frequently they purchase, or anything else? And we were able to start a relationship. And I think because our team acted very professionally, we were able to land a much bigger sort of partnership together and build a relationship over the coming years, where they scaled that digital team to be what today is now ZX Ventures and is hundreds of people. We've been able to have terrific relationships with them over the years and do a lot of interesting stuff together. So I think recognizing the bucket that you fall in, how are you going to unlock partnerships that then get you to bigger partners and go from there? Over the years, we've had the benefit of working with some of the biggest brands in the world, anybody from like a Coca-Cola to AB InBev to, Diageo's portfolio of companies. We've done all sorts of different interesting things with these brands. Some are very sort of low touch points. How do we, promote our products in certain categories within your app? Some have been highly experiential. How do we send people to the Super Bowl or to the Olympics? How do we send people to adult summer camp? How do we have celebrities show up and surprise you at your doorstep without you sort of anticipating that? But in any event, I think it's always come back to our sort of core principles around a partnership, which is A, it has to be mutually beneficial. B, we need to provide real value to the partner. Otherwise, it's not going to be a recurring relationship, and it'll be a waste of time in the long run. And C, it needs to not be a distraction from our core business either. As you start to get bigger, I think it's really important to note that anybody and everybody will want to do something with you. The smaller companies, the bucket that you were just in, they'll want to partner with you for certain things. Bigger companies will want to partner with you for certain things. We've had people approach us to do all sorts of crazy build outs and activations and stuff like that. And in some cases, we've just had to turn it down because it was a distraction from what we were really trying to focus on with our customers. So I think it's important to note that while you can get to a place, you land these bigger and bigger and bigger relationships, bigger and bigger partnerships, which can not only be driving growth, but introduce new revenue streams, help you launch into new categories, address entire new customer segments. It's important to recognize that you can also get wrapped up in partnership land, if you will, and totally detract from your core business. You know, if a big company can take a small company and basically turn you into an agency that just does all their bidding for them, they will totally do that. And so you need to have the wherewithal to recognize, you know, what do we want to accomplish, the confidence to recognize what do we want to accomplish, and make sure that you're executing on that, and that these partnerships, again, are mutually beneficial, not all just one way. Um, you know, thinking of some of the partnerships that we've structured, right? So we have major brand partnerships at this point with big companies looking to understand maybe a category. How do I understand the tequila category? How do I understand the red wine category or your convenience category? And how do we make sure that we have a substantial presence there? I think that, you know, over the years, one of the sort of most fascinating trends that we've seen is big companies being willing to give up a little bit of their creative control, understanding that we have an audience, we have a tone of voice, we speak to our customers in a very specific way, and that them copy and pasting their billboard campaign or their, you know, out of home campaign or their TV campaign and then just putting it in an app doesn't always resonate with that customer base because it looks foreign in the context of that marketplace. So I think um, a fascinating change that we've seen over the past 6 years is big companies go from being extremely reluctant. Nope, we have our brand, you know, guidelines teams. You're going to copy and paste exactly what they're doing in another campaign, and we're just putting that campaign onto your platform. To some of these brands really coming full circle and saying, you know, your customers better than us. Talk to them however you want. Of course, you got to run it by us a little bit, but how do you have creative control? And that's where we've seen the most success, the highest conversion, and campaigns that really do well. I think separate from the big brand relationships, that both are revenue streams, help drive growth, launch us into new territories. We've also done a lot of highly experiential partnerships. How do we do something out of the ordinary for our customers, which is some of what you're seeing here on this slide. Of course, you know, you go into wine, maybe there's some wines that we've tasted we really like that we're featuring. Or how do we drive just awareness or drive a creative experience? So this comes back to something I mentioned earlier, which is, you know, liquor stores are sort of arguably a low point in the industry. Shopping at a liquor store, historically, their value proposition is just like Smirnoff's on sale, so come buy it here. Absolute's on sale, come buy it here. What we've tried to do is sort of remove the whole just constant pitch of, hey, there's alcohol here, alcohol, you know, alcohol is sort of this social lubricant just in our society. And we try and deliver things like plans, experiences, you know, funny commentary on life to our customers. And then alcohol just happens to be in the background, or wine or snacks or whatever it may be happens to be in the background. To that effect, you know, we did an amazing activation with Channing Tatum where he actually created a vodka brand called Born and Bred Vodka. It tastes incredible. We had access to it before it hit the market, and we're big fans of the product. And you know, their problem was, how do we go out and how does Channing Tatum make an announcement saying, hey, I launched a vodka brand, you can buy it, when they're in only a handful of retailers? What is he going to tell his audience? Hey, in LA, you can go buy this product if you go to this one shop way down on ABC Street or this other shop way over here on XYZ Street. So what we were able to do is take a product, introduce it to our retail network throughout LA. And by putting it in roughly a dozen shops, anybody in greater Los Angeles could buy his product. And then he went out and surprised people doing deliveries, Facebook Live, the whole thing. You know, we didn't tell anybody about it. We wanted to be very organic. And he would just show up and, you know, to people's doors, and they would just absolutely lose their mind. It was fun, but I think it was also fun because we didn't tell people in advance. It wasn't, hey, order on Friday and maybe Channing Tatum will show up. It was just you ordered something and then there he was at the door. And, you know, that drove obviously a tremendous amount of press, not only for us, but for his new brand. It gave him the platform to say, I launched this new company and anybody in an entire city could purchase it, which is something that they didn't have distribution there yet. And then obviously we were able to do something really creative together. And because it was mutually beneficial, you know, that's something that didn't cost them money, didn't cost us money, but we drove real value to one another. The second example here is something I mentioned earlier, but this is one of our first ever partnerships where we did sleepover packs that would be like tequila and you know, pajamas, or tequila or wine and underwear with MeUndies. And we had male and female underwear models go out and do these deliveries. A little crazy, a little wild, but particularly in the early days, it was, how do we get our name up there? How do we get attention? How do we do something that people hadn't seen? I think, one of my favorite headlines was LA Times said, underwear models delivering alcohol, what could go wrong? And it was true. People were super interested in it, conflicted about it. Some people loved it. Some people didn't like it, which I think was exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to create something a little bit polarizing so people would talk about it. And it generated tremendous press for us, tremendous growth, and lived on for a long time. And it was a partnership that people saw, it resonated with them, and it unlocked all sorts of other things down the road. I think same thing with Nick Jonas, who, full disclosure, I'd say he's an investor on our cap table very early on. He had a couple singles coming out. He was hosting a couple big shows that weekend. And candidly, he just had the idea, hey, it would be fun if I came out and surprised some people and did concerts in their living room or what have you. And very similarly to any other celebrity activation we've done, we didn't want to ruin sort of the magic of that moment by telling people in advance. I think that makes it very just scripted, right? And so, hey, order, Nick Jonas may show up. Okay, and then he shows up, and you're not as surprised. Having somebody just totally shock and awe people drove, I think, a wild experience, a memorable experience, moments that people actually captured, and then that got shared out, and of course, people started tweeting about it, and moments later, it started getting picked up in press. But all that aside, I'd say, these are examples. We have partnerships with big brands that we structure to heavily drive growth, share information, do all these things. Separate from that, we've structured a lot of highly experiential partnerships that either are directly aligned with our brand or maybe slightly different. But we're something that drove a memorable moment. And really, at the end of the day, we just wanted people talking about it. We wanted to deliver something that they would talk about, tell their friends about. So, beyond I think the highly experiential stuff, we talked about things that, I drove growth by sort of a viral campaign. Channing Tatum showing up at your door drove, tremendous press, and people were talking about it, and everybody in that city loved it. And that's great. But there's also partnerships you can structure that not only unlock a new revenue stream, which we've done with a lot of these big alcohol brands on, ad revenue or data revenue, but also can drive growth. The example I gave earlier, DoorDash has done this tremendously well, right? You see major national TV commercials by huge quick service restaurant brands that are paying for those ads. We've done this with alcohol brands that are willing to, participate in running ads that feature their brands. But there's a lot of big companies out there where if you're a new channel or a new outlet, they absolutely, they have huge media spends that they're willing to allocate to different things that are creative and resonate with customers in different ways. And to the extent you can structure something that's interesting to them and that drives value to them, there's a lot of, they have access to budgets that you just don't have as a smaller company. I think this is particularly fascinating right now in alcohol, because something that was mentioned earlier is, historically, the majority of ad spend in the alcohol industry is towards the on-premise. It's getting, your sales reps to go into accounts and structure the cocktail menus. It's advertising in stadiums, Coachella, Stagecoach, sporting events, hospitality, travel. All those media dollars really go into that. And about 2 months ago, all of that was shut down. A huge amount of alcohol company spend is just on March Madness, and March Madness was shut down. So all these brands turned around and said, not only are all of our media channels effectively terminated for the indefinite or foreseeable future, but the ability for people to go shop in those on-premise channels is also turned off for quite a while. So how do we think through where are we going to spend media dollars? How do we have a total reset on how we're thinking about our advertising campaigns? And you even saw the CMO at Diageo come out and sort of have a very public statement that they're really only allocating money into channels that they believe drive real results or impactful results that are measurable. And I think that's one of the benefits that, as an e-commerce player in this space, we provide is the ability to actually track an ROI on a media spend compared to if I go sponsor, a community park or Dodger Stadium or Yankee Stadium. Did I sell more beer? Maybe, but unknown. And so I think having these companies that have been spending in a particular pattern for decades have an event that makes them sort of reset how they're thinking about media planning is a tremendous opportunity for companies to be working with them. It's not just us, right? We see streaming services that are hosting concerts, and it could be Tim McGraw's living room, and now you want an alcohol brand to be advertising on their platform for the very first time, and they haven't done that before, right? So there's all sorts of new opportunities for companies across the gamut in any industry that is changing rapidly right now. And so with everything sort of being in flux, I think that there's obviously a lot of turmoil out there. We are extremely privileged to be in a category that happens to be doing well during this. We have lots of very close friends companies that don't have that mutual benefit, but the people that are buckling down and getting creative, there are tremendous opportunities out there. So, to summarize, I think a few things that we talked about, whether it's a viral campaign, trying to do a campaign or a partnership with a company of similar size and stature, or trying to shoot for the moon and work with the biggest of the big out there. At the end of the day, I think we have a couple principles that really guide how we think about partnerships. A, are we bringing something unique and interesting to the market? A, to our customers, and B, to that company. If we aren't, it's not going to work. Maybe you get that partnership done, but long term, you're not driving real value. If you don't do something that stands out or drives real mutual benefit, then it doesn't make sense, right? And again, people love partnerships. Bigger companies have entire teams that are just dedicated to partnerships. And so if I work at XYZ company and my only job is to hunt down and try and lock in partnerships, of course you're going to get outreach from those people, and of course people are going to want to do things with you. It has to be mutually beneficial. I think the second part is if you're going to commit to a partnership, don't just line up all this stuff and hope okay, somebody executed on it, great, whatever. Be helpful, drive real value. In most of the partnerships that we've seen go wrong, it's usually because either one or both parties kind of thought it was a cool idea, but didn't really care, and subsequently were lazy in the execution. And then it just kind of falls flat and puts a bad taste in everybody's mouth. So if you're going to do something with somebody, do it on purpose. Make sure that you are executing quickly, and you're helpful to the other company, and get something done. And then lastly, I'd say only do partnerships that actually create benefit for you. If it's not beneficial to the company, it's just going to be a distraction. Everybody will want you to build all sorts of crazy and cool stuff, or use your technology, your team, to do all sorts of interesting things for them. It also has to benefit you. Of course, it would be a dream to partner with, again, name that dream company that you'd love to work with. But if it doesn't add benefit back to you, it's just going to be a distraction for your team and your customer base. And so thinking through how you create things that are mutually beneficial, you have to make sure that you actually get something out of it as well. Which comes to the last point. I think that, you just need to be selective. When you're small, it's how do I get that partnership? And you may reach out to a whole bunch of companies, and people just say, I'm not interested, or, I don't want to do it. Okay. Well, in the early days, it's going to all be about how do I lock in something, and maybe you get 50 no's before you get the one yes on something that you think is going to drive value or growth or revenue. But as you get bigger, things are going to be flooded, coming your way all the time. And it's just about being selective. Do things that, will only add benefit to both people. And the other part of it is partnerships can either be pretty lightweight or be extremely operationally intensive. Also be thinking through, whether you're executive at the company or whatnot, again, the impact it has on your team. Yeah, this sounds cool. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, but now operations has to deal with this huge headache when they got all this other stuff going on, or whatever it may be. So thinking through how it impacts, not only other team members, but sort of each department within your company, I think is critical. Otherwise, you can just get totally lost, doing this stuff. But, if you do it correctly, you pick the right partnership, you drive mutual benefit, you do something that really puts results on the board, and you can communicate back to your own team afterwards. Look, I know this took time and energy, but look, here's what it did for us. I think that those are all critical, sort of setting your principal guidelines and then going from there.
Thanks, Chris. That was really informative. And I think we had mentioned at the top that you can send in your questions, and I'll be picking out some from the Q&A section to chat about. So we'll be moving into this now. But, I can start maybe a little bit with, the industry itself. I think we had, obviously talked about this before, is highly, regulated. It is a very, archaic sort of, it's got all these laws and regulations. And, I think you mentioned that a lot of it is very hard to navigate, especially for a startup or an e-commerce operation, because you have all these, cross state lines and delivery obstacles that you come across, not to mention it's very expensive. But what are, so I think we'll start maybe with, just pulling this up, sorry. Yeah, maybe we're getting this a lot. It's that, can you share an example of maybe a partnership that didn't really work out, or that, didn't pan out as well as you had hoped, and maybe what you learned from it?
Yeah. I think I won't name the company, but I would say that there was a relationship with a company that we thought would introduce an interesting feature. It was primarily a SaaS company, and they try and get their tools implemented into all these different marketplaces. So it would be an interesting feature to our customer base. And we could promote them and they could promote us. I think that it required an SDK integration that our client teams had to do. I think we ended up, it was pitched as being pretty simple. Of course, no, every SDK integration is super simple, right? And then they always end up being extremely complicated and take a long time. But I think that, our team ended up working on it for just a long time. It just went on and on and on. They're working on implementing this tool to even have this thing go live. Once it went live, people didn't really care about it, didn't really have, that much of a response to it. And so I think we made the mistake of saying, we're going to dedicate engineering resources and operations team resources for, 2 to 3 sprint cycles on making sure this is included. Took a lot of people's time and focus from marketing and growth to launch this thing and get it out there. And we really hadn't tested the idea with a customer base first. Is this something you even want? And when we ended up launching it, it just took a bunch of time, resources. Customers didn't really care. People didn't really use it. And at the end of the day, I think everyone was kind of bitter about it. It was like, okay, you took all this time and energy from other things we could have been working on to launch something that took a lot of energy, and we didn't see any impact from it. I think there's a couple other things we saw that we thought would be interesting. It's less than a partnership that went bad, but just didn't end up being a channel for us. There was a trend maybe 2-3 years ago of just doing giveaways. There's a couple of platforms out there where you can partner with, a bunch of companies and always participate in these giveaways. Someone's giving away, flights to Australia, and you give away credit to your app or whatever it may be. And we participated in a couple of those. Then, everyone gets access to the email list afterwards, and you can market to it. But I think we saw that fall off. People, subscribe to those things to sort of get one of the items in there, the free Casper mattress or the flights to, a new country or whatever it is. And then the re-engagement that goes into emailing them or trying to communicate with them, hey, you participated in this giveaway, but it just, those could take not tons of work, but a bit of work and people's time and attention to constantly run them. And we've never seen tremendous growth out of those. We've never seen that really work as a channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to follow up just on the samples, I think, which was somebody, a pre-sent question, which is, have you ever considered adding samples from brands to your delivery? I know, I don't know if you mentioned this, but for you guys, you really do, differentiate yourself with speed because of your logistics network. But what about, as far as building out the loyalty program and all the other offerings that would convince people to stick with you versus going back out to the liquor store now that everything's reopening, quote unquote.
Yeah. So samples being, okay, there's a new like snack company or whatever, and on every order we include a sample to go out. There's, I would say from a regulatory perspective, again, we work in an interesting space, but I can't give away free stuff with the purchase of alcohol. I can't quote unquote incentivize the purchase of alcohol by giving away something for free. So, samples and product samples and all these things have always been, depending on the state you're in, a little tricky for us. But we definitely have done things introducing people to add-ons or discounted add-ons at their checkout or credit to try out a new service or a new product, whatever it may be. But yeah, sampling is just a little bit different in the alcohol space. So the effect you were ordering something that didn't have alcohol in it, or you placed an order that had a whole bunch of things outside of alcohol, we could do that. But it's just a little tricky.
Yeah, figured. This one actually comes from Kale, our modern retail editor, and it's actually tied to another one that someone asked, which is how do you, draw that partnership attention when you're a small company in a small, few select locations? How do you convince these big brands, whether these giant international distributions, to go for that, localized partnership? Is it worth your time? And then I think someone else said, when you are small, how do you not get taken advantage of in that rate? Like you said, maybe a waste of time.
Yep. The best thing that's always worked for us is do a little bit of research and then be really creative. So someone reaches out or you reach out to them, understand their business and what maybe they're trying to accomplish right now, and come up with a creative solution for that. Early days with somebody like Anheuser-Busch, when they reached out, they thought we were much bigger than we were because of some of the press we were getting from some of these local partnerships. So they thought we were this, at the time, I think we were 5 people. And at the end of our first partnership with them, they're like, wow, that went so smoothly. This is incredible. We're also doing this with Instacart and 1 or 2 others. And candidly, we just absolutely loved working with you guys. And, how big's the team? And I think they sort of thought we were like a 200 to 300 person company. And when I said we're 5 people, they were kind of like, oh man, okay. Would they ever have partnered with a 5-person company? I don't know. So I think we made ourselves look big when we were in fact a very small team. But we knew that they were looking at digital. We knew that as a beer brand, they hadn't really done much on digital before. And on that very first phone call, we just had to get their attention. We had to make sure that we did our research, we're saying the right things, got their attention as to, okay, if we're going to run a test in this space, why would we work with these people? And so that was, flexing our muscles a little bit on what our capabilities were, what a partnership could look like. Again, everything about your company. An outsider knows very, very, very little. And so even on that first call, being able to really inform them of what you could do together and have an idea of what that could be, I think is key. Don't rely on them to come up with all the ideas. Like we were basically trying to pitch these guys, okay, we can do this thing, that thing, the other thing, and 1 or 2 of those stuck with them. And then how do you not get taken advantage of is sort of the second step. I think a big company goes, okay, great. Yeah, this sounds wonderful. Would love to work with you. And then you actually walk down the path of what does this look like? How do we execute on this? And that's where all the sort of little additional asks creep in, right? Well, can we do this? Can you do this? Can you do this for us? Can you do it? Well, and I think that many people sort of overwhelmingly feel obligated to just say yes, because they're so terrified that like this may not work or whatever. You can absolutely say no. I think even at one point with a different big alcohol company, they wanted to get super experiential with us on a lot of different things. And at one point it was just that they were like, we want to do something highly experiential every single month. And for us, that would take all of our operations team, time and focus. And it was cool stuff too, but it was just like, we need to be focusing on fast, reliable deliveries. We need to be focusing on market expansions. We need to be focusing on experiences for our customers. And this is a component of that. And because it's a component, we can't say yes to something that takes all of our time. And it was difficult. It was a difficult choice to say like, we can't do it, So But we ended up doing other stuff with them. Yeah, and they got it. They said, look, their feedback I think at the time was, listen, your customers better than us. You tell us. So it worked out.
Great. And then I think I wanted to just move a little bit into, branding. Obviously, there's so much going on right now, and we can't really ignore it. And so obviously talking about alcohol, it's a touchy topic. Like you said, it's a very emotional purchase for a lot of people. People have been quarantined. There's now protests going on. I actually wanted to talk about this as far as, being an on-demand app. With a lot of these so-called frontline workers who were fulfilling a lot of these orders, delivery, grocery, and all of that. There's always been, controversy around labor, wages, and all of that. And then what happened was, now that, we're moving into these Black Lives Matter protests, they've also been exposed to some police brutality themselves when they're out delivering. What do you feel like brands can do, like Saucey maybe, or just anyone really in this space can do to actually do better and protect the workers legitimately, not just posting, a black box on Instagram?
Yeah. So one, I'll take sort of worker safety, and then second, we can talk about the Instagram posts. But candidly, I think that the most challenging segment for on-demand workers was grocery, right? We have the benefit of being a product that usually works with independent liquor stores as opposed to big box. We've worked with some of the big box players in the past, and we found just operationally, the independent mom and pop stores work better with us. But we have an order that gets picked, packed, and ready to go, and is already paid for because we integrate into the payment system. And so when a driver arrives, they're just grabbing a bag and leaving. That's very different than grocery, which is I have to go into the store. And I think this was even much scarier a couple of weeks ago or months ago, but I go into the store, which could be a crowded store where everyone's making a run on the store. I have to shop the entire location, which a grocery list can be 100 plus items. And then I'm going to go wait in line and check out and pay and then leave. And if I'm going to do more than one order, I could be in there for hours. And so that was a very challenging problem, I think, for people like Instacart and some others.
Yeah, they more backlash, a lot of them, especially with all the tipping debacle that constantly happens with wages. I know we've talked about how you guys are big proponents of adding on the fees in order to increase the driver's wages and make it more of a personalized experience. And then I also actually wanted to add on, take your time in answering that. What about, how does the partnerships, someone also asked, how do they tie into, this quote unquote, diversity initiatives that brands constantly talk about? Are you, do you reach out to, different people or more marginalized groups versus, these obviously big companies that are owned by these large corporations? I don't know if you just had some thoughts on that to add to, the safety guidelines.
Yeah, so I'd say rounding out the safety guidelines for us, it's so one is shopping locations. I think we've had the benefit of you can show up and the order's picked, back, ready to go, and you can just grab it and leave. You're not shopping inside of a store. And so when we put out a lot of our own safety guidelines and procedures, we made sure that that was very clear. And I think that we beneficially did not have to deal with a lot of things that the grocery side had to do. I think separate from that are demonstrations, riots, safety, again, traveling through different parts of town. And we've always had a very proactive approach on this in the past. There's been plenty of other times historically where there's been demonstrations and closures. And so our operations team is always extremely on top of, always communicating out to the driver network and driver partners. If you're in any situation ever where you don't feel safe, don't do the delivery, period. That, your safety is always first and foremost. It's not like, oh man, got to get that bottle of wine to that customer at all costs. If you don't feel safe, you don't do it. Second, really paying attention, whether it's on local reports, citizen app, all sorts of things that show closures or planned events, and making sure that, we are either closing certain parts of town on time or blocking off certain parts of town so that no deliveries are going into areas that are extremely crowded. This could be in a positive thing, like during Pride, every year at Pride, you have a big parade, it's pre-planned. We make sure we send out messaging ahead of time. We've been a huge supporter since the year we launched. And how do we carve out that, part of the city and make sure that everybody's safe, even just from like basic traffic and all that stuff, to now with demonstrations and then getting into the evening, sort of separate riots, has been how do we make sure that drivers and customers are always safe? And in many ways, that's just been closures and staying in tune with that across all these markets. And that can change throughout the day. Okay, there's going to be a curfew. There's a closure at this time, closed and make sure we're always closing a little bit earlier, making sure that everybody's coming back safely. I think separately on the topic of Black squares on Instagram and Black Lives Matter and everything going on, that
sorry, a blind spot I think in the industry is that a lot of these workers tend to be people of color, so there's a little bit of irony there, right, in that they're actually putting their bodies on the front line for it.
Absolutely. So that's something that internally I think that the big discussions that we had is being in the on-demand space. A lot of the drivers may be of specific communities that are going through a lot of challenges right now. Separate from that, we saw a lot of companies come out and you do the Black Square and you say, XYZ, or there's a letter from the founder. We took the approach of saying, first and foremost, let's talk internally as a company. We have a lot of people I think we have the benefit of being a company in LA. We're a heavily diverse company just by the nature of where we're located, right? So just hiring the best talent that we found, we've ended up with an incredibly diverse company. Despite the fact that we're relatively small, we don't have a big HR team. We don't have all the, this, like if you're Facebook, a huge, all these teams built around diversity and inclusion, all these, we don't have any of those resources. So for us, it's just hiring, the best talent that we can. And we've had the benefit of ending up being incredibly diverse. But I think that the first step for us was, okay, talking about things like race is challenging at work. So that was sort of the first step for us was let's talk to our team members, our Black team members about how they're feeling. Are they safe? What's going on with them in their personal lives? And then let's try and break down sort of the first barrier of, can we talk about this at work? Can we make it comfortable to talk about work? I think if you rewind not even that many years ago, different, but a similar type of issue with the gay community was, you still had don't ask, don't tell in the military just a few years ago, right? You had huge changes happening around marriage or saying that marriage is legal or illegal or all these challenges. That's very recent history. And so we took a notion when we launched the company saying that we were going to be tremendously supportive of the gay community and be willing to talk about those things openly at work and celebrate Pride Month and say, okay, what does it mean? How do we give people sort of a history lesson on Pride and different and things that our team members have gone through? But we never did that for specifically, our Black team members, because I think that was sort of like the next barrier. How do you get comfortable talking about that? So the first thing I think that we did was you said, let's open up a discussion internally. Make sure everyone's okay, which has been a big discussion we've been having over the past 2 months anyway with COVID. In your personal life, work life, whatever, people are stressed out, they're tired. How do we make sure people both in their personal and professional lives are just okay? And then you have, a recurrence of a big issue happening in our society happen again. And, how do they feel safe? Do they feel okay? And are we okay talking about this at work? And how do we talk about it at work? And then the second part was, what do we want to do as a team? This isn't just a letter from me as a founder or a CEO or whatever. Okay, here's my thoughts on it. And here's what I want to do. The default practice was, let's talk to our team members. We have team members that are heavily involved in all sorts of community organizations or work, regardless, outside of work on their own. How do we bring some of that into the culture of the company or bring it more into the culture of the company? How do we talk to them about what they want to see happening in their own communities? How is it when we draft a letter to our customers? It's not just me saying, okay, guys, like, here's how I'm feeling about it, blah, blah, blah. How do we write the letter as a team, which we did. We set it up in a Google Doc. We had people contributed to it. We went through multiple iterations. And then to the Black Square comment, my guideline to everybody was, we even had a debate. Do we even send out a message? Like, do we want to affect change in the company? We want to have this permeate into our hiring practices, how we think about our operations, how we think about going forward as we continue to get bigger, how we operate in these communities. Should we just do all of those things and not send out an email and be like, hey, everyone, look at me, we're doing that too? And that was a big debate. And ultimately, we thought that there is benefit to having a company that takes a public stance, and it also sort of holds you accountable. And I think it adds social pressure to other companies to be thinking about it the same way. So we ended up sending out a message. But we were very thoughtful about it, and candidly, we don't have all the answers, and we're trying to figure this out right now. Is what are the things that we want to do as a company long term? Sure, there's the black square on Tuesday or whatever, but how do we think about how do we actually make changes within our organization going forward? And I think that's why we've taken a thoughtful approach. We sent out our message, earlier this week, and really our message was as opposed to, okay, here's a X, donation to X organization, and we did this other thing. Really, for us, it's a commitment to how are we going to be working on this as an issue in perpetuity, and then publish that type of information both on our site and our blog and out to the community. So I hope that we've been doing well. I hope our team feels that we've been doing well. But yeah, it is not a simple issue.
No, well, I think that's probably a great place to end. I know we have a lot more questions, but I want to thank you so much for this and thank everyone for attending. And I know your email you actually provided in the slide deck. So if anyone's interested, maybe they can just email you directly. And, we'll see you guys next time. And thanks so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.